Ron DeSantis is now threatening television stations in Florida with criminal prosecutions unless they take down ads supporting a referendum that would overturn Florida's near total ban on abortion. It's the latest escalation in DeSantis's increasingly extreme efforts to use the powers of state government and the pocketbooks of Florida taxpayers for political campaigns against citizen-led petition drives to end the statewide abortion ban and legalize marijuana. More on that in just a sec, but please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button so you'll never miss an episode of the show. And please leave a comment too, letting us know how you feel about what's happening down here in Florida.
When I saw the tumor on the MRI, my first thought was, am I going to be able to see my daughter again? The doctors knew if I did not end my pregnancy, I would lose my baby, I would lose my life, and my daughter would lose her mom. Florida has now banned abortion, even in cases like mine. Amendment 4 is going to protect women like me. We have to vote yes.
Hello, and welcome to Seeking Rents, the podcast. I'm your host, Jason Garcia, and you just heard a television ad that Ron DeSantis does not want you to hear. Last week, the DeSantis administration sent letters to television stations across Florida threatening to criminally prosecute them and their employees if they continued airing that TV ad, which was paid for by Floridians Protecting Freedom, the group leading the campaign to pass Amendment 4. Amendment 4 is the proposed constitutional amendment on the ballot this fall that would overturn a near total ban on abortion in Florida. You know, the statewide abortion ban that Ron DeSantis signed into law last year, just before launching his failed campaign for president. The statewide abortion ban that is so extreme that even Donald Trump, the guy most responsible for overturning Roe v. Wade, has criticized DeSantis in Florida for going too far. This attempt to scare TV stations into taking down this ad is pathetic. DeSantis' Department of Health, which is run by an anti-vaccine quack, is trying to use a decades-old state law that's supposed to protect public health from contamination at places like slaughterhouses and sewage facilities, and trying to use that law instead to control political speech. It's also disgusting. The state of Florida is trying to silence a dying woman, trying to stop a woman with terminal brain cancer from sharing her personal story. And it is unconstitutional. The leader of the Federal Communications Commission has already condemned this act as, quote, dangerous. And a First Amendment specialist at Harvard Law School told Slate, the online magazine, that DeSantis' threat to TV stations is, quote, about as blatant a violation of the First Amendment as you'll ever see. In fact, Mark Joseph Stern, a senior writer at Slate who covers courts and the law, wrote just a terrific piece completely pulling this apart from a legal perspective. I'll post a link to that story in the show notes. But this is also the latest step in what has become an unprecedented effort by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to marshal the power of state government and the pocketbooks of Florida taxpayers against his own constituents, all to stop Florida voters from passing policies that he personally opposes. We are not just talking about Amendment 4 and abortion access here either. The DeSantis administration is also weaponizing state government against a second citizen-led petition, Amendment 3, which would legalize marijuana in Florida. Florida has never seen anything like this. To be very clear, there have been plenty of constitutional amendments in the past that Florida governors have personally despised, like amendments to lower class sizes in public schools or raise the minimum wage. But none of DeSantis' predecessors, not Jeb Bush, who was famously hated that class size amendment, not Rick Scott, none of them abused their office like this to use public resources on political campaigns. And this goes way beyond threatening TV stations too. So we're going to unpack it all today. What the DeSantis administration is doing is it fights to keep abortion banned in Florida and to keep marijuana illegal. How he is blurring the lines between public governing and partisan campaigning, and how much of your tax money he's spending on it all. because it looks like a lot. Nearly $16 million so far, which is another thing Ron DeSantis doesn't want you to hear. Before we get any further into it, though, I just want to say a couple of things about this show. First, if you read the newsletter, we spent a lot of time and effort there trying to get to the bottom of this stuff and trying to pin down just where the state is pulling money, how much it's spending on these political campaigns. This episode is going to cover a lot of the ground we've been over in those stories. Part of what prompted me to record this was a conversation I had with a friend over the weekend who's a listener of the podcast and just told me that she prefers to listen to stories rather than read them. So I figured I'd do this episode just in case there are other folks like that too. Second, I'm recording this about, I think, 12 hours before Hurricane Milton is expected to strike Florida. Honestly, part of my thinking here is it's just a way for me to channel some of the anxious energy that comes from waiting for a hurricane to strike. I'm here in Orlando where we're expected to get some of the impacts, although clearly not anything as awful as what looks like it's facing the Southwest Florida coast. I'm also guessing there are plenty of folks like me out there who just wouldn't mind thinking about something else for a few minutes other than impending disaster. And really, this election is just too important to stop talking about, especially now that mail voting has already begun. But I do want to say to everybody listening to this, I hope everyone stays safe in this storm and comes through it as unscathed as possible. If you need anything afterwards, please reach out. I'm happy to use whatever contacts I can to try and find help for folks. Just stay safe. Okay, let's get into the main thrust of the story here. And I figure probably the best way to start here is just with the basics. So there are two citizen-led constitutional amendments on the ballot in Florida this fall. The first is Amendment 3. That's the one that would legalize marijuana. So marijuana is currently legal in Florida, but only for medicinal use. Amendment 3 would legalize it for personal or recreational use, to basically completely legalize marijuana. And then there's Amendment 4, which, as I mentioned earlier, would overturn DeSantis's statewide abortion ban, but it would also prohibit any further government interference with abortion, which is really important because we've already seen from a number of Republicans in the Florida legislature that they want to totally ban abortion in all cases, in every circumstance. So Amendment 4 would prevent something like that from ever happening. It's important to realize here that more than 1 million Florida voters already signed petitions in support of Amendment 3. Nearly 1 million signed petitions in support of Amendment 4. That's how these referendums got onto the ballot in the first place. Polls also show that both of these amendments are broadly popular with voters, and this crosses party lines. This is with Republicans, with Democrats, with independents. These are not purely partisan issues. And both of these got approval from the Florida Supreme Court, which gets to review ballot measures for things like accuracy before it allows them onto the ballot. And this is one of the most conservative Supreme Courts in the country, one where Ron DeSantis himself has appointed most of the justices, and it still allowed these two amendments onto the ballot. Admittedly, it did so barely. The marijuana amendment, Amendment 3, made it onto the ballot through a 5-2 ruling. Amendment 4, the abortion amendment, made it onto the ballot through a 4-3 ruling. But it did it. It got there. The organizers and supporters of these two amendments have jumped through every legal and procedural hoop they are supposed to get a fair vote in Florida. Those Supreme Court rulings happened in April, but almost immediately it became clear that the DeSantis administration was going to resort to some dirty tricks to try and derail them. The first thing that made it clear was just a few weeks later in May, rumors started circulating that the governor and Republican leaders in the Florida legislature were working on plans for a special session that was going to happen around Memorial Day. And one of the things they were thinking about doing was rushing a couple of competing constitutional amendments onto the ballot that would be designed to either confuse voters or create conflicts that would make it all but impossible to enforce any of them. Whatever they were planning, it didn't happen. The plans for that special session collapsed. But then a bunch of other stuff did start happening. And so let's start with Amendment 3 here. The first thing to note happened in June when Ron DeSantis vetoed a bill that the Republican Florida legislature had just passed that would have sharply restricted sales of euphoria-inducing products made from hemp. Hemp, which, like marijuana, comes from cannabis plants, has become a big competitor to the marijuana industry. But why would the governor, who apparently opposes the expansion of marijuana, doesn't want marijuana in more places around Florida, why would he veto a bill that was meant to stop the spread of hemp around Florida? Because in exchange for that veto, the hemp industry promised to raise $5 million for the Republican Party of Florida to fund ads against Amendment 3. That's according to text messages obtained by Jim DeFeedy, the fantastic investigative television reporter in Miami. Here's to read a quote from one of them. "We know nothing in life is free, and neither was this veto," one hemp executive wrote. And sure enough, the Republican Party of Florida is now paying for TV ads attacking Amendment 3. Do you know who else is paying for ads attacking Amendment 3? You are. Taxpayers are. They're doing so in the form of what are allegedly public service announcements from the Florida Department of Transportation, which is ostensibly about reminding people of the danger of driving under the influence of marijuana. An ad, though, that goes out of its way to to warn about the threat of legalizing marijuana in an ad that is set to a score straight out of a horror movie. I'm gonna go ahead and play it for you here so you just get a sense of what you're paying for right now.
Unlike alcohol, there's no easy way for law enforcement to detect how high you are when driving. A DUI can more than double your car insurance, and driving high affects more than just you. DUI crashes increase in states with legalized marijuana, putting everyone at risk. Don't drive high. It can raise your premiums or end your life.
You know, you could almost convince me that's a normal PSA. But then you have to ask yourself, why would the state of Florida, a state in which marijuana is not legal, have to include in a PSA a warning about legalizing marijuana? Because it's a political ad. It is designed to undercut support for Amendment 3, pure and simple. All that said, the DeSantis administration's efforts to stop Florida voters from passing Amendment 3 pale in comparison to all the lengths they're going to stop Florida voters from overturning the DeSantis's prized abortion ban with Amendment 4. So the state-led campaign against Amendment 4 probably began most clearly in July, when the governor and Republicans in the Florida legislature essentially hijacked something called the Financial Estimating Impact Conference. So the Financial Estimating Impact Conference is one of these, normally like boring corners of state government. It's this group of 4 state economists whose job it is to analyze the potential economic impact of proposed constitutional amendments. They write just a short summary that goes on the ballot about, whether an amendment is likely to cost taxpayers money or save taxpayers money, whatever the likely financial impact is. Normally, the people on this are professional, nonpartisan economists, people who have been doing this stuff for years, who are trained in this kind of thing, and whose job is to be fact-based and neutral. But DeSantis decided to replace his appointee to that panel with one of his partisan staffers, a guy whose background is in politics and campaigns and knew nothing about economics and economic forecasting and that sort of thing. But then House Speaker Paul Renner, a Republican from Palm Coast, and the House Speaker who was presiding when Florida passed its abortion ban, did him one better. Renner actually gave a taxpayer-funded job to an anti-abortion fellow from the Heritage Foundation, the right-wing think tank in Washington, D.C. that you probably know as you would recognize as the main entity behind Project 2025 at the national level. Giving this Heritage Foundation hack state-funded taxpayer job in the Florida House of Representatives allowed Renner to put her directly on this panel as his representative. I just want to stop there for a moment and emphasize how crazy this is. The Heritage Foundation was one of the groups that lobbied Florida to pass its near total abortion ban, an abortion ban that prohibits almost all abortions after just 6 weeks of pregnancy, which is before many women even realize they're pregnant. The Heritage Foundation lobbied for that law. And now a Heritage Foundation fellow got put onto the panel that is writing the ballot language for a constitutional amendment that would overturn that abortion ban. That is crazy. That is so inappropriate. And that's still not all. The governor's office also made sure to bring in an anti-abortion legal scholar from Catholic University to testify before this impact conference as it was debating what to put on the ballot, what the impact was going to be. And these guys ultimately got exactly what they wanted. The Financial Estimating Impact Conference, with these new partisan hacks in charge of it now, wrote a economic summary on the ballot that was so speculative and so misleading and so one-sided that the state's chief economist, one of the only professionals remaining on the panel, refused to sign off on it. But that is going on the ballot. Your ballot will now show this misleading and one-sided speculative economic impact statement. That is directly on the ballot now. that was sort of something I don't think anybody saw coming, is weaponizing that part of state government. But then in August, they went even further. The DeSantis administration started sending state police to interrogate Floridians who had signed petitions in support of Amendment 4. I mentioned nearly 1 million Floridians signed these petitions. You had cops and prosecutors showing up at people's doors with folders full of their personal information, including copies of their driver's licenses, all sort of demanding to know whether they'd signed, claiming that they didn't think the signatures matched. What made this especially crazy is that local election supervisors, including both Republicans and Democrats, had already verified these petitions. This had already been checked out. The deadline to even challenge this stuff had already passed. There was no reason to do this other than to intimidate people, and as we'll come back to later, create some sort of narrative that you could try and weaponize later. And then in September, the advertising against Amendment 4 began. It started when the Agency for Healthcare Administration, which is the state agency that's supposed to license hospitals and other healthcare facilities, began posting campaign materials explicitly attacking Amendment 4 on a public website. A public website, by the way, that has been created with bipartisan support as a tool for Floridians to find neutral, fact-based information about healthcare services and to comparison shop for procedures. ACA instead has now turned that website into a hub of all sorts of anti-Amendment 4 propaganda. And then ACA started running a television ad both promoting that website and also defending Florida's current abortion ban, trying to soften the public image of what is one of the strictest abortion bans in the entire country. One of the interesting things here is that the initial version of that ad was actually co-sponsored by a lobbying group, the Florida Association of Broadcasters, which represents owners of TV and radio stations. And I just want to emphasize that too, because that is wildly inappropriate. This is a lobbying group that seeks and receives favors from the DeSantis administration. Just a couple of years ago, they got a favorable legal opinion out of the DeSantis government, allowing them to charge higher prices for certain kinds of political advertising. But now the DeSantis administration is leaning on these lobbyists and getting them to help fund advertisements attacking Amendment 4. Interestingly, after both I at Seeking Rents and Nate Monroe, the statewide politics columnist for USA Today's Florida papers, wrote about this inappropriate partnership and started trying to get answers out of the Florida Association of Broadcasters about why on earth you would co-sponsor political ads. That ad disappeared and it was replaced by a new version, one that was no longer co-sponsored by the broadcasters, but instead sponsored by 3 state agencies, ACA, along with the Department of Health and the Department of Children and Families, which is, the state's child welfare agency. I'm going to play you this ad so you can get a sense of, again, what you are paying for.
Florida cares about women and families. Last year, Florida provided nearly $500 million to support pregnant women and their families. No woman can go to jail for having an abortion, and abortions are available before a child's heartbeat is detected, and in cases of rape or incest, and to save the life and health of the mother. For accurate information about all your options, visit our website. Because Florida cares.
Note how careful they're being there. The advertisement itself never says anything explicitly about Amendment 4, but it directs you to a website that aggressively attacks the amendment over and over. It literally says that the amendment threatens women's safety. This advertisement, by the way, is also misleading as hell. True, no woman can go to jail for getting an abortion, but doctors sure as hell can go to jail for providing them. And its claims that women can get an abortion if their life or health is in danger totally overlook the fact that there are an incredible number of hoops that they have to jump through in order to do so, and that we already have case after documented case of women who have been denied abortions or whose care has been delayed so significantly that they had to leave the state to get health care. And then after these ads, most recently, we got that letter we talked about at the top where the DeSantis administration, via the Department of Health, is now threatening to sue television stations running pro-Amendment 4 ads. Like I said, we have never seen anything like this before. And there's a reason for that. You're supposed to trust state government to be fair to all constituents, right? In this case, we're expecting state government to help administer these elections freely and fairly. And here they are taking sides in an election. This stuff is so over the line that it has already sparked at least 3 lawsuits. One of them has been dismissed, although it could be refiled. 2 are still live. Now we come to what is probably the most obvious and fundamental question about all of this. How much is this costing you? Television advertising is expensive in Florida, a state with 10 media markets, which is one reason why if you're a political campaign and you can somehow get taxpayers to pay for your advertising instead, you'd probably love that. This question, how much are they spending, is one that Ron DeSantis and his staff have repeatedly refused to answer. So I've spent a bunch of time digging through a couple of state databases of state contracts and vendor payments, trying to figure this stuff out on my own. Now, these databases don't have copies of the actual contracts in most cases. They do have like little clues that you can sort of glean from them. And going through all that, I found about a half a dozen contracts all signed in the past month that appear they're very likely related to these campaigns against Amendment 3 and Amendment 4. And the spending behind them totals nearly $16 million. That's the equivalent of like 30 miles of bike trails or 3,000 college scholarships. Instead, it's paying for political ads. I won't go through the exact details of all these contracts here, but I will post a story in the show notes that does. So if you want to read more about the particular and why I'm saying these all appear related to these campaigns, you can read that there. But I want to flag a couple of examples, particularly suspicious ones. So last month, within 24 hours of each other, ACA, the Department of Health, and the Department of Children and Families, the same three agencies that are paying for those anti-Amendment 4 ads, all signed contracts with the same advertising vendor, ordering almost $13 million worth of advertising. Again, there is the database doesn't say what exactly these contracts were for, and these agencies have all refused to fulfill public records requests so far seeking copies of these contracts. But these contracts were signed just days before their television ads started showing up on television stations. And by the way, these ads, which are likely just the first of several iterations that are probably coming, are running everywhere. We have seen them during college football games, on Fox and CNN, even on the Weather Channel. And I want to flag one other contract I found while doing this. This was a $260,000 contract that ACA signed in late September with Cooper and Kirk. That is a politically plugged-in law firm whose partners just happen to include one of Ron DeSantis' former roommates. Under that agreement, the state healthcare agency is going to pay Cooper and Kirk attorneys $715 an hour to defend the agency in one of those lawsuits accusing it of illegally campaigning against Amendment 4. I want you to think about that for just one more second here. Not only is the DeSantis administration spending taxpayer money on political campaigns, it's also spending taxpayer money on $700 an hour attorneys to defend its decision to spend taxpayer money on political campaigns. This is still not all the spending, too. Remember, we talked about the financial impact estimating conference where they wrote the misleading and speculative ballot summary for Amendment 4. That Catholic university professor who showed up to testify, it turns out the DeSantis administration was paying him $200 an hour. And that's according to reporting from the Tallahassee Democrat. And that Heritage Foundation fellow that got put directly on the estimating conference, she's being paid $75 an hour by taxpayers for that part-time job she got from the House. She is still on the state payroll, by the way, while still working for the Heritage Foundation. And that's still not all. We've also reimbursed these two more than $6,000 for travel expenses, for airplane tickets, for hotel rooms and meals. So another important question in all of this, too, is where is this money coming from? Setting aside how much they're spending, what pots are they pulling this money from? That's another question that the governor's office and state agencies refuse to answer. And there's a reason for that. This is a crucial question. This is where they are most likely to have crossed the line and to get themselves into trouble. And we know the governor's office has crossed this line in the past. You might remember a couple of years ago, the legislature put money into the state budget for Ron DeSantis to relocate migrants out of Florida to other states. He ended up using that money to go get migrants in Texas and fly them to Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. That was illegal. When pressed by reporters, DeSantis has vaguely alluded to, quote, a wide variety of pots of money that are used for public service announcements. And to be clear, these advertising contracts that I found, they're being funded from an assortment of sources. So just to give you a few examples, in some cases, the DeSantis administration is pulling money out of budgets used to fund child protection grants, to monitor the medical marijuana industry, and even to pay engineers who design road and transit projects for the state. It also seems likely that the administration is repurposing money that the legislature initially earmarked to promote a website that helps folks comparison shop for healthcare, and also to develop a website for new and expecting parents. And at least one of these main agreements appears to be funded with proceeds from Florida's share of the nationwide legal settlement with the opioid industry. Think about this. It looks like Florida is taking money it got from Purdue Pharma and other corporations that profited off the opioid epidemic and using that to fund political ads. Lastly, I just want to run through a little bit about how much DeSantis is blurring the lines here between public governing and partisan campaigning, and just how hard it has become to tell where one ends and one begins under this administration. Separately, I found some television records that show that the state seems to be using the same ad buyer for its television commercials as the Republican Party of Florida and other explicitly political groups are for their ads against Amendment 3 and 4. The governor also has his chief of staff, a guy who is paid a $202,000 a year annual salary by Florida taxpayers, personally raising money for some of these political groups attacking the two amendments. Earlier this month, the governor used a state office to arrange a strategy call with anti-abortion activists about Amendment 4. And one of the people DeSantis invited to speak on that call is a consultant for one of the main political groups working against Amendment 4. And also, I mentioned this earlier, but it's worth restating because it is so brazen and inappropriate. The Heritage Foundation, a group that lobbied to ban abortion in Florida, was then invited to serve on the state panel that wrote ballot language for the amendment meant to overturn the abortion ban that the Heritage Foundation lobbied for. That's crazy. And it's also become abundantly clear here that part of this game is to use the state to create political narratives that can be exploited in political messaging. For instance, right about the time, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but right about the time DeSantis began sending state police to interrogate Floridians who signed petitions and then claiming publicly that the state had reason to suspect fraud and needed to investigate, opponents of Amendment 4 began airing television ads that claimed the amendment was fraudulent. And now that ballots have begun going out to voters with that bogus Heritage Foundation written economic statement on it, opponents are using images of that ballot language in their own television ads, as if it was some sort of impartial state document saying this, rather than the group that literally lobbied to ban abortion in Florida. It is just one giant political operation being run out of the governor's office, and you're paying for it. Listen, I mentioned earlier that Ron DeSantis has been sued 3 times about this already. Like I said, one of those suits has been dismissed. 2 could be refiled. 2 are still active. And the way this is going, we'll probably see more lawsuits before this is all over. But the reality here is there is only one group of people who truly have the power to put a stop to this: voters. Okay, we're going to leave it there. That was a lot. I think, I didn't mention any of this at the top, but if you haven't already, please think about signing up for a subscription to the newsletter. Easiest way to find us is seekingrentsfl.com. Subscriptions are free. None of our stories or podcasts are behind a paywall, but if there is an option to voluntarily pay for a subscription, if you can afford one, if you've got the means, please think about doing it. The revenue we get from voluntary paid subscriptions are really helpful for funding a lot of the reporting like this that goes into pulling public records and finding all the documents that we can for this sort of thing. And lastly, please everybody stay safe during this hurricane, and we'll see you on the other side. Thanks for listening. Before I go, though, just another reminder to hit the like and subscribe buttons to make sure you don't ever miss a show. And if you've got any thoughts about the DeSantis administration's campaign against the abortion and marijuana amendments in Florida and the fact that you're paying for them, please make sure to leave a comment for us to see. And of course, for everybody watching this in the path of Hurricane Milton, I hope everybody stays safe and unscathed. We'll see you on the other side.